My husband smiled as he handed me a $50 allowance, claiming our multi-million-dollar tech empire was suddenly bankrupt. But as I felt the cold, hard plastic of a VIP hotel keycard hidden deep inside his custom suit, the sickening scent of cheap vanilla perfume hit me. He wasn't broke. He was funding a secret second life. He thought he was playing a naive, silent wife. He had no idea he just handed his entire fortune to a master auditor. Subscribe to see this web of deceit unravel, and comment below right now. What city are you watching this from? The unraveling of a 10-year marriage doesn't sound like shattering glass. It sounds like the soft, synthetic click of a declined credit card. But before we get to the humiliation at the espresso bar, we have to start with the laundry. It was a Tuesday evening in our minimalist, glass-walled fortress in Palo Alto. Julian had just returned from what he called a critical venture capital summit in Seattle. He was exhausted, or so he claimed, dropping his tailored Italian suit over the back of the white leather sofa before retreating to the master bathroom. The shower water turned on, masking any sound in the cavernous house. I have always been a creature of habit, a woman who brings order to the chaotic brilliance of a Silicon Valley CEO. I picked up the jacket to hang it. That's when my fingers brushed against something rigid in the inner breast pocket. I pulled it out. It was a sleek, matte black keycard. No branding, no logo, just a gold microchip and a suite number embossed in silver. 4012. But it wasn't just the card. As I held it, a scent drifted up from the silk lining of his jacket. It wasn't the sandalwood cologne I bought him for his birthday. It was heavy, overly sweet, and entirely foreign. Cheap vanilla perfume, the kind that lingers like a bad lie. I didn't scream. I didn't storm into the bathroom and demand answers. Before I was a Silicon Valley wife managing charity galas and household staff, I was a senior financial analyst. I don't react to data. I verify it. I slid the card back into his pocket, exactly where I found it, and went downstairs to pour myself a glass of Cabernet. When Julian finally emerged, smelling of eucalyptus body wash and wearing his cashmere loungewear, I handed him a glass of scotch. We sat by the fire feature in the living room. "How was the hotel in Seattle?" I asked, keeping my voice as smooth as the wine in my glass. "Did they put you up at the Fairmont again?" Julian didn't blink, but his left shoulder twitched, a microscopic tell he only displayed when pitching a terrible idea to his board of directors. "Yeah, the Fairmont. Standard corporate setup. Terrible pillows." He took a sip of his scotch, his eyes fixed on the fire, not on me. "Interesting," I murmured. I didn't know the Fairmont switched to unbranded matte black keycards for their standard rooms. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. Julian's jaw tightened. He slowly lowered his glass to the coaster, the ice clinking against the crystal. When he looked at me, the warmth in his eyes was gone, replaced by the cold, calculating glare of a man who destroys rival startups for sport. "It was a VIP overflow suite, Clara," he said, his tone dripping with condescension. "The logistics of these summits are complicated. Frankly, it's above your pay grade to worry about where I sleep when I'm securing our future. Are we really going to do this? Are you going to play the paranoid housewife?" He stood up, towering over me, using his physical presence to end the conversation. "I'm exhausted. I'm going to bed. Don't create problems where there aren't any." He left me sitting in the dark. I knew he was lying.
But I didn't know the punishment for my curiosity was already in motion. The next morning, the Californian sun was bright and indifferent. Julian had already left for the headquarters. I drove my SUV to my usual upscale cafe, craving a matcha latte and a moment to think. The line was long, filled with tech developers and venture capitalists. I reached the register, ordered, and swiped my Platinum American Express. Beep. Declined. The young barista frowned. "Sorry, Clara."
It didn't go through. A hot flush crept up my neck. I laughed it off, pulling out our joint checking debit card. Silly chip reader. Try this one. Beep. Declined. Insufficient funds, the barista whispered, leaning in so the line behind me wouldn't hear. But I felt the eyes burning into my back. I left the coffee on the counter and practically ran to my car. My hands were shaking as I pulled up the banking app on my phone. Face ID loaded the screen. Access denied. Contact primary account holder. I sped home, my mind racing. I threw open my laptop on the kitchen island and tried to log into our investment portals, the mortgage accounts, the savings. Passwords changed. Two-factor authentication rerouted. I was entirely locked out of the financial empire I had helped him build from our cramped apartment 10 years ago. The front door opened. Julian walked in, a full hour before he ever came home for lunch. He strolled into the kitchen, his hands in his pockets, a terrifyingly calm smile on his face. "Having tech issues, darling?" he asked. "What did you do, Julian? Why am I locked out of everything?" He sighed, leaning against the marble counter, playing the role of a disappointed father. "You've been out of control lately, Clara. The spending, the paranoia. I had my wealth management team do a preliminary review this morning. You're hemorrhaging our capital. Until I can get our finances audited and stabilized, I've had to freeze your access." "Hemorrhaging?" I gasped. "I buy groceries and pay the pool guy. You just bought a third Tesla." "It's a company vehicle," he corrected sharply. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a crisp $50 bill, sliding it across the marble toward me. "Here, this should cover your lattes and whatever else you actually need this week. Consider it an allowance. We are on a strict budget until my audit is complete." He turned and walked out, leaving me staring at the green paper on the counter. He thought he had broken me. He thought cutting off my money would make me compliant, silent, and weak. He forgot who built the algorithms he used to make his first million. He wanted to do a financial audit? Fine. Because little did Julian know, he hadn't just locked me out of the bank. He had just given me the perfect excuse to tear down his firewall and look at the offshore servers. The $50 bill sat on the cold white marble of the kitchen island for 3 days. I didn't touch it. I just stared at it every morning while drinking tap water, calculating exactly how long $50 lasts in a place like Palo Alto. If you factor in the organic produce Julian demanded for his specialized diet, the artisan coffee beans he expected in the grinder, and the premium dry cleaning for his silk ties, $50 was an insult designed to break me by Tuesday afternoon. That was his strategy. Starve the siege. Force me to come crawling to his home office, begging for a top-up, admitting my financial incompetence. I didn't crawl. On the 4th day, I folded the crisp green bill, slipped it into my pocket, and drove my dusty SUV, which I couldn't afford to wash, to a discount supermarket 2 towns over. Walking through the fluorescent-lit aisles, the humiliation finally sank its teeth into me. I was Clara Vance. 10 years ago, I was the one who structured the initial seed funding for his first app. I was the one who stayed up until 3 odd a.m. running predictive financial models while he played video games. Now, I was standing in front of the canned goods, calculating the sales tax in my head to make sure I didn't overdraw the exact $50 I had in cash. I had to put a box of generic pasta back on the shelf. The cashier, a teenager chewing blue bubble gum, looked at me with a mixture of pity and boredom as I counted out quarters to cover the final 80 cents. I bagged my own groceries, my hands moving mechanically. I didn't cry. Crying is a biological response to pain. What I felt wasn't pain. It was absolute crystalline clarity. Every cheap item I placed in those plastic bags was a meticulous note I was taking in my mental ledger. When I returned to our glass-walled house, the contrast was violently absurd. Julian's brand-new company Tesla was parked in the driveway. As I carried the cheap, rattling bags of groceries into the kitchen, he walked in through the garage door. He looked radiant. He was wearing a fresh, custom-tailored linen suit, and the distinct, savory smell of a dry-aged ribeye clung to him. He had just come from a $300 business lunch while I was rationing generic brand oatmeal. "What is all this?" he asked, his nose wrinkling as he looked at the plastic bags on the counter. "Did the delivery service mix up our order?" "I canceled the delivery service, Julian," I said, my voice perfectly level as I unpacked a dented can of beans. "We're on a strict budget, remember? The audit. I'm making sure I don't hemorrhage any more of our capital." He chuckled, a rich, patronizing sound, and walked over to the refrigerator to grab a bottle of imported sparkling water. As he reached out, the afternoon sun caught the heavy metallic glint on his left wrist. My eyes locked onto it. It was a Patek Philippe Nautilus, rose gold. I knew watches because I used to buy them for him as anniversary gifts when we actually had joint money. That specific model retailed for at least $80,000. "New watch?" I asked, keeping my tone lightly curious, as if commenting on the weather. He glanced down at his wrist, turning it so the light caught the sapphire crystal. "Oh, this. It was a token of appreciation from the board. A retention bonus of sorts. You know how it is, Clara. In my position, you have to project success. If the venture capitalists think we're struggling, the stock tanks. It's an investment in optics." "Of course," I murmured, turning my back to him so he couldn't see my eyes. "Optics are everything." "I have another investor trip this weekend," he announced, leaning against the counter, completely unbothered by the miserable groceries between us. "Miami this time, a crucial Series B funding round. I need you to pack my dark blue Tom Ford suit and the new loafers. And Clara, try to manage the house a little better while I'm gone. The pool looks slightly cloudy." "I'll take care of it," I said to the pantry wall. "Good girl," he said, patting my shoulder as he walked past me. The faint, undeniable scent of that cheap vanilla perfume drifted off his collar, mixing nauseatingly with the expensive steak. He left for Miami on Friday morning, kissing my cheek with the cold mechanics of a politician kissing a baby. I watched his black car disappear down our gated driveway. The moment the gate clicked shut, the facade dropped. I didn't go to the laundry room. I didn't check the pool filter. I walked straight up the floating glass staircase to his private home office. Julian was arrogant, but he wasn't careless. The heavy oak door was locked, but I had kept the master physical key hidden inside the hollow spine of a first-edition book in the library for 5 years. I slipped it into the lock and pushed the door open. The room was freezing, the air conditioning cranked up to keep his dual-tower local servers cool. He had frozen me out of the cloud, changed the passwords to the banks, and locked the primary accounts. He told me our empire was broke, but as I sat down in his leather chair, my fingers hovering over his heavy mechanical keyboard, I knew one fundamental truth about tech CEOs. They never delete their own backups. I booted up the secondary terminal. The password prompt blinked aggressively. He thought I was just a housewife now. He forgot I was the one who wrote the backdoor encryption protocol for his very first server farm. I typed in a string of 32 alphanumeric characters that hadn't been used in a decade. The screen went black, then flooded with lines of green data. He told me we were bankrupt. But as the financial archives began to decrypt and scroll across the monitor, I realized the money wasn't gone at all. It was just moving in the shadows. And I was about to follow the blood trail. The servers hummed with a low mechanical vibration that seeped through the soles of my shoes. The home office was kept at a steady 64 degrees to prevent the hardware from overheating, but the chill sinking into my bones had nothing to do with the air conditioning. It was the icy realization of exactly who I had been sleeping next to for a decade. For 6 hours, I sat bathed in the harsh blue light of the secondary monitor. My eyes burned, but I didn't blink. I was back in my element. The spreadsheets, the routing numbers, the endless columns of data, this was my native language. Julian had locked me out of the user-friendly banking apps and the polished wealth management portals, assuming that would blind me. He forgot that a user interface is just a pretty mask for the raw, unformatted data underneath. I bypassed his primary firewall by utilizing a legacy administrator protocol he had deemed obsolete 5 years ago. Once inside the local drive, I didn't look at our personal checking accounts. That would be amateurish. If Julian was hiding money, he wouldn't put it under his mattress. He would bury it in the corporate structure. I pulled up the unedited profit and loss statements for his tech firm, cross-referencing them with our joint tax returns from the past 3 fiscal years. At first glance, everything looked pristine. The revenue was staggering. The operational costs were high but proportional, and the shareholder payouts were exactly as legally required. Julian was a master of the macro illusion. But I wasn't looking at the big picture. I was hunting for the discrepancy in the pixels. I began filtering the general ledger, isolating automated recurring transfers. If you want to find a man's true priorities, you don't look at his grand public gestures. You look at his quiet, automated habits. I scrolled past the mortgage payments, the luxury car leases, the exorbitant pool maintenance fees, and the country club dues. Then, my eyes caught a sequence of numbers that made my breath catch in my throat. It was buried deep within the research and development expenditures. A series of monthly outbound wire transfers categorized vaguely as external hardware consultation. There is a golden rule in forensic finance. Ambiguity is the breeding ground for fraud. I clicked on the first invoice, dated exactly 14 months ago. The amount was $85,000. The vendor was listed as Equitas Management LLC. Equitas, the Roman goddess of justice and fairness. The bitter irony almost made me laugh out loud in the freezing room. I had never heard of Equitas Management. They weren't on any of our vendor lists. They hadn't attended any of the corporate galas, and Julian had certainly never mentioned them during his long, boastful monologues about his supply chain. I ran a reverse search on the routing number attached to the wire transfer. It didn't bounce to a tech hub in Silicon Valley or a manufacturing plant in Taiwan. The IP address and the receiving bank were located in a commercial strip mall in Reno, Nevada. Nevada, a state famous for its impenetrable corporate veil and anonymous shell companies. My fingers flew across the mechanical keyboard, the loud clacking echoing in the silent house. I isolated every single payment made to Equitas Management LLC over the last 14 months. I exported the data to a fresh encrypted spreadsheet and hit the sum function. The number populated at the bottom of the column in stark, unforgiving black text, $4,250,000. Over $4 million had been quietly siphoned out of the company's operational budget, money that belonged to his investors, and by extension to our joint marital assets, and funneled into a ghost entity in the desert. Suddenly, the $50 allowance made perfect, sickening sense. He wasn't auditing me because we were broke. He was auditing me to create a documented paper trail of financial instability on my end, a smokescreen to distract his wealth managers and the board from his massive embezzlement. He was draining our legitimate empire to build a completely separate, untraceable kingdom. I leaned back in the leather chair, pulling the matte black keycard from my pocket and placing it next to the keyboard. $4 million buys a lot of VIP hotel suites. It buys luxury sports cars that are never parked in our driveway. It buys an entirely separate life for a woman who wears cheap vanilla perfume. Julian wasn't just a cheating husband. He was a corporate criminal utilizing his own company as a slush fund. A sudden, sharp ping erupted from the server tower. A red notification flashed in the top right corner of my screen. Remote access initiated. User, J. Vance. Location, Miami, FL. My heart slammed against my ribs. Julian was logging into the server from his hotel room. If he saw my terminal active, if he saw the IP address pulling the Equitas files, the game was over before I could make my first move. I had less than 30 seconds before his dashboard updated. I jammed a high-capacity encrypted flash drive into the USB port. I didn't have time to be delicate. I dragged the entire Equitas ledger, the unedited tax returns, and the backdoor routing protocols onto the drive. Transferring. 45%. 68%. The remote access progress bar on his end was loading. He was querying the very firewall I had just bypassed. 89%, 95%, 100%. I yanked the drive out of the port, hit the kill switch sequence on my terminal, and plunged the monitors into darkness just a fraction of a second before the server fans roared to life, indicating a successful remote login. I sat in the pitch-black room, clutching the warm flash drive in my palm, listening to the erratic thumping of my own pulse. I had the data, but raw data is just a theory until an expert validates it. If I was going to use this to destroy him, I couldn't afford a single legal misstep. I pulled my personal cell phone from my pocket and scrolled to a number I hadn't dialed in 6 years. An old college roommate who didn't work in tech. She worked for the IRS. Julian thought he was the smartest man in the room. He had no idea I was about to invite the federal government to the party. The neon sign outside the diner in San Jose flickered with a persistent, annoying buzz, casting a harsh red glow over the cracked vinyl booth. It was an establishment that still only accepted cash and smelled faintly of stale grease and industrial bleach. It was exactly the kind of place where a Silicon Valley billionaire would never step foot. That made it the perfect boardroom for my investigation. I sat across from Sarah, nursing a mug of bitter black coffee. We had shared a dorm room at Stanford 15 years ago, long before I became a CEO's wife and she became a senior forensic auditor for the IRS. She hadn't changed much. She still wore her hair in a tight, no-nonsense bun, and her eyes still held that predatory gleam when presented with a complex numerical puzzle. I slid the encrypted flash drive across the sticky Formica table. It looked incredibly small, a tiny rectangle of plastic holding the weight of a 10-year marriage and millions of dollars in corporate fraud. Sarah didn't say a word. She pulled an air-gapped, heavy-duty laptop from her leather messenger bag. She plugged the drive in. I typed in my 32-character decryption key. The screen bloomed to life, reflecting in Sarah's glasses as she opened the Equitas Management LLC files. For 10 minutes, the only sound was the clinking of cheap silverware from the kitchen and the rapid clicking of her touchpad. "He's arrogant," Sarah finally whispered. He layered the obfuscation well enough to pass a standard internal audit, but he got sloppy with the routing protocols. "He's commingling investor capital with private expenditures through a phantom vendor." "Can you trace the endpoint?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. "Where is the $4 million going?" Sarah's fingers flew across the keyboard. "Equitas isn't an investment vehicle, Clara. It's a localized disbursement fund, a piggy bank, and it's bleeding cash into hard assets." She turned the laptop slightly so I could see the screen. She had isolated the outbound wire transfers from the Equitas account in Nevada. They weren't going to tech startups or offshore tax havens. They were going to the California coastline. $2.5 million for a beachfront property in Carmel by the Sea, purchased outright in cash under the LLC's name, Sarah read. Monthly lease payments for a 2024 Porsche Macan. And here, an American Express Centurion card paid in full every 30 days. "Pull the itemized credit card statements," I commanded. Sarah hacked through the secondary encryption. The screen filled with charges. $5,000 at a luxury boutique in Beverly Hills. $1,200 at a high-end hair salon in San Francisco. And there it was, recurring massive charges at the Fairmont Hotel for VIP overflow suites. "There's a secondary driver listed on the Porsche lease," Sarah noted, clicking on an attached PDF document. She zoomed in on the signature line. The name was Chloe Vance. I stared at the screen. The air in my lungs turned to ice. She wasn't just a mistress. He had given her his last name. He was legally binding her to the Phantom LLC, allowing her to masquerade as his wife on paper, while I was sitting in Palo Alto rationing generic groceries. "Clara," Sarah said softly, "this isn't just infidelity. This is wire fraud, embezzlement, and a gross breach of fiduciary duty. If the SEC sees this, Julian is looking at federal prison. But there's a problem. These files show that the tech firm paid Equitas and Equitas paid Chloe. But a smart defense lawyer will argue that a rogue CFO or a corrupt accountant set this up without Julian's knowledge. Plausible deniability. To nail him to the wall, to absolutely guarantee the authorities freeze his assets and not yours, we need the smoking gun. The cryptographic authorization, I realized. Exactly, Sarah nodded. We need the master digital ledger that proves Julian personally authorized every single transfer. He would keep it physically on him at all times. His secured work laptop, I whispered. He never lets it out of his sight. Julian returned from Miami on a Sunday afternoon, bringing the heavy, humid scent of the Florida coast and the unmistakable arrogance of a man who believed he had just successfully hidden another $1 million. He walked through the front door of our Palo Alto home with the loose, relaxed posture of a predator that had just eaten. I was waiting for him in the kitchen, carefully setting the stage. I had spent the last 2 days perfecting my costume and my script. I wore an oversized faded cashmere sweater that he had always hated, my hair tied back in a messy knot, and no makeup. I needed to look exactly like the pathetic, broken housewife he had engineered me to be. I was boiling water for generic pasta, the $50 allowance visibly sitting on the counter next to a stack of unpaid utility bills. He dropped his leather duffel bag by the entryway, his eyes sweeping the room before landing on me. A faint, cruel smile played on his lips. "Still doing the pioneer woman routine, Clara?" he asked, walking over to the marble island. He didn't offer a kiss. He pulled a bottle of imported sparkling water from the fridge and leaned against the counter, watching me stir the boiling water with a wooden spoon. I took a deep breath, summoning a tremor into my hands. I let my shoulders slump, physically shrinking myself in his presence. "Julian, please," I whispered, my voice thick with manufactured desperation. "I can't do this anymore. The card was declined at the pharmacy today. I'm sorry. Whatever I did wrong with the budget, I'm sorry. Please just end the audit." His posture shifted. The casual cruelty morphed into a swelling, intoxicating vanity. He loved this. He fed on the submission. He walked over to his briefcase, placed it on the kitchen island, and pulled out his secured work laptop. "You have to understand, Clara, this isn't a punishment. It's a recalibration," he said. "I need to see that you understand the value of $1 before I restore your privileges." "I do," I choked out, forcing a single hot tear to spill over my eyelashes. He flipped the laptop open. He pressed his thumb against the biometric scanner and then inserted a small cryptographic hardware key into the side port. The screen glowed to life. "Let's look at the household projections," he murmured. This was my window. I reached for my glass of red wine. My hand shook with the adrenaline of the kill. As I brought the glass toward my lips, I intentionally clipped the edge of the heavy marble fruit bowl. The crystal shattered. The dark, crimson Cabernet splashed violently across the counter, cascading directly onto the lap of his light gray, custom-tailored tropical wool trousers. Julian leaped back, a string of vicious curses erupting from his mouth. "Are you completely incompetent?" he roared. "These are $3,000 pants, Clara." "I'm so sorry. I'm so clumsy," I cried out, grabbing a handful of paper towels and dropping to my knees. I started dabbing wildly at his shoes, fueling his rage. "Get away from me," he snapped, swatting my hand away. "Get the club soda and the stain remover. Now, I'm going to the master bath to take these off." He stormed out of the kitchen. The moment his back disappeared around the corner, the tears instantly dried. The pathetic, clumsy housewife vanished. I stood up. I had maybe 60 seconds. I pulled the tiny, encrypted USB-C flash drive from my pocket. I slid it into the open port on the opposite side of his hardware key. The laptop chimed softly. My fingers flew across his keyboard. I opened the root directory, navigating through the hidden partitions. System 32, drivers, archived profiles. There it was, a single, heavily protected folder labeled AQ Admin Logs. I dragged the entire folder onto my flash drive. Calculating time remaining, 45 seconds. I could hear the water running upstairs. 30 seconds. "Clara! Where is the damn club soda?" his voice boomed. "I'm looking, Julian," I yelled back. 5 seconds. Transfer complete. I ejected the drive, palmed it in my left hand, and immediately dropped back down to my knees on the floor, surrounded by broken glass and spilled wine. I grabbed the paper towels and started scrubbing the marble tiles. Julian stomped back into the kitchen wearing a hotel bathrobe. He looked down at me, pathetic and crawling on the floor. He sneered in absolute disgust. "Leave it," he commanded, walking over to his laptop. He pulled his physical security key from the port and slammed the machine shut. "I'm calling my legal team tomorrow morning. This little experiment in domestic management is over. I'm restructuring our entire arrangement, Clara, and you are not going to like the new terms." He tucked the laptop under his arm and walked away, completely convinced he had just signed my death warrant. The text message arrived on Tuesday morning. "Meet me at Sterling & Associates. 555 Montgomery Street, floor 42. 10:00 a.m. We are finalizing the financial restructuring." I dressed carefully, a simple pale beige silk blouse and slacks. I needed to look like a woman who had already surrendered. The law firm occupied the top 3 floors of a shimmering glass monolith. The atmosphere was aggressively hushed. A perfectly manicured receptionist escorted me to a corner boardroom. The ambush was meticulously staged. Julian sat at the center of a massive, polished mahogany table. To his right sat Richard Sterling, a legendary Silicon Valley divorce attorney. To his left was a junior associate. I sat across from the 3 of them. Richard Sterling cleared his throat. "Mrs. Vance, Julian has briefed us on the unfortunate deterioration of your marriage. We are here today to bypass the ugly public theater of family court and offer you a streamlined, generous exit strategy." The junior associate slid a thick binder across the table. Marital dissolution and non-disclosure agreement. It was a financial slaughter. $500,000. No alimony. No stock options. No house. 500,000, I said softly, letting a tear pool in my eye. Sterling interrupted. "If you do not sign this today, we will drag this through the courts for the next 5 years. We will bury you in litigation fees. You will walk away with absolutely nothing." "You're cornered, Clara," Julian added with a sickening gleam. I looked down at the expensive Montblanc pen. Julian shifted in his seat, a smug smirk spreading across his face. I held the pen poised over the signature line. Julian was leaning forward, his eyes hungry. "Is something wrong, Clara?" Sterling asked. I looked up at them, and the manufactured fear in my eyes vanished. I placed the pen back down on the mahogany table with a deliberate, ringing click. "You're right, Richard," I said, my voice no longer a whisper. "The ink doesn't bite, but the federal government certainly does." Julian's smirk faltered. "Sign the damn papers." "I'm not signing a thing," I said. "Because this isn't a divorce negotiation. This is an intervention." I reached into my purse and pulled out a single, neatly folded sheet of paper. I slid it across the table toward Sterling. It was a printed screenshot of the master digital ledger. Sterling's face went an ashen, sickly gray. "Julian," Sterling whispered, "what is this?" "It's nothing," Julian snapped, snatching the paper. As his eyes scanned the page, the blood drained from his face. "No, Julian," I said. "Since I am technically a founding partner with equal shares, I have a fiduciary duty to report internal fraud." I walked to the floor-to-ceiling window. "I didn't just audit our household budget. I audited the last 5 years of your life." I turned back to the table. Julian was shaking. "Richard," I said, "check your email. 10 minutes ago, a complete copy of that master ledger was delivered to the regional director of the SEC, the DOJ, and the board of directors." As if on cue, the phones on the table began to vibrate violently. "You're insane," Julian hissed. "You just destroyed the company." "Oh, Julian," I smiled. "I didn't destroy the company. I saved it from a thief. The board is already convening an emergency session, and since I'm the one who provided the evidence, well, let's just say they're very interested in my restructuring plan. I walked toward the door. You thought I was the silent wife, Julian. You forgot one thing. I was the one who built the vault. I always knew where the spare key was kept. The elevator ride down was the quietest 30 seconds of my life. Two men in charcoal suits, federal agents, were moving toward the elevators as I exited. I walked out into the San Francisco air. A seizure of assets isn't just about the money. It's a total erasure of identity. I drove toward the coast, to Carmel by the sea. I saw the physical manifestation of the betrayal. A woman was in the driveway of the glass and steel house, screaming as a tow truck hooked chains to the Porsche Macan. "The LLC's assets have been frozen by federal order, ma'am," the tow driver said. My phone buzzed. A voicemail from Julian. "Clara, you bitch! They're taking the servers!" "They're taking everything." His voice was thin and vibrating with terror. I deleted it. I drove back to Palo Alto. FBI agents were carrying boxes out of our front door. They were taking the Patek Philippe watch from his nightstand. I went to the kitchen and picked up the $50 bill he had left on the counter days ago. It was a souvenir. 6 months later, the news cycle had long since moved on. Julian Vance was sentenced to 12 years. I stood in front of the mirror in my new penthouse, wearing a charcoal gray power suit. I walked into the tech headquarters through the main entrance. The employees stopped talking as I passed. I entered the boardroom and took my seat at the head of the table, Julian's old seat. "Good morning, everyone," I said. "The era of the charismatic visionary is over. From today, this company runs on transparency and precision." After the meeting, I retreated to my new office. I took a lighter from my desk and held the corner of the $50 bill to the fire. I watched as the green paper curled and blackened. The audit was finally closed. The balance was restored. Julian was a ghost in a jumpsuit. I was the new CEO of my own life, and for the first time in 10 years, the numbers finally added up.